The rain hammered against the funeral home windows like angry fists demanding entry. Destiny Carter sat in the front row, staring at the mahogany casket that supposedly held her father's remains. Her black dress clung to her like the grief she refused to feel. She hadn't spoken to Thomas Carter in 5 years, and now she never would again. Or so she thought. The pastor's voice droned on about eternal rest and heavenly peace, but Destiny's mind wandered to their last conversation. The shouting. The accusations. The way her father's face had crumpled when she'd called him a failure and walked out of his life forever. Her phone buzzed against her purse. Destiny glanced down, expecting another sympathy text from a colleague. Instead, her blood turned to ice water in her veins. The message was from a number she knew by heart, even though she deleted it from her contacts years ago. Her father's number. I'm not dead. I'm still alive. Meet me at Riverside Park tonight at 9 p.m. Come alone. Trust no one. Dad. The phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the hushed funeral home like a gunshot. Every head turned toward her, including her mother Grace's tear-streaked face. Destiny, baby, what's wrong? Grace whispered, reaching for her daughter's hand. But Destiny couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she'd just seen. The room spun around her like a carnival ride gone wrong. The flowers' perfume became suffocating. The mourners' faces blurred into a sea of concerned expressions. She stumbled to her feet, her heels catching on the carpet. I need air. Honey, please, Grace started, but Destiny was already pushing past the relatives and family friends, practically running toward the exit. The rain hit her face like tiny needles as she burst through the funeral home doors. She leaned against the brick wall, gasping for breath, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone. She read the message again. And again. And again. It was impossible. She'd seen the accident report. The car wrapped around that oak tree on Highway 52. The closed casket because the injuries were too severe for viewing. The death certificate her mother had shown her through tears. But there it was. A message from beyond the grave, written in her father's straightforward style. No flowery words. Just facts and instructions, exactly how Thomas Carter communicated everything. Her grandmother Ruby appeared beside her, moving with surprising speed for a 76-year-old woman. Child, you look like you've seen a ghost, Ruby said, wrapping a thin arm around Destiny's shoulders. The irony of those words made Destiny laugh, a sharp, hysterical sound that cut through the rain. Maybe I have, Grandmama. Maybe I have. Ruby studied her granddaughter's face with eyes that had seen decades of family secrets and pain. Whatever's got you shaken up this badly, you know you can tell me. Destiny wanted to show her the message. Wanted to share this impossible burden with someone who'd loved Thomas Carter since the day Grace brought him home 40 years ago. But the message had been clear. Trust no one. I need to process Dad being gone. Destiny lied, hating herself for deceiving the one person who'd never lied to her. Ruby's weathered hand cupped Destiny's cheek. The dead don't stay buried when they got unfinished business with the living, baby girl. Sometimes what we think is an ending is really just a beginning in disguise. Those words would haunt Destiny for the rest of the day as she mechanically went through the motions of her father's funeral, accepting condolences from people who barely knew him, listening to stories about his kindness and strength from neighbors and co-workers, watching her mother sob into tissues while clutching that death certificate like a lifeline. And through it all, the phone in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather, holding secrets that could shatter everything she thought she knew about her family. By 8:30 that evening, Destiny stood at her apartment window, staring out at the city lights blurring through the rain. Riverside Park was a 15-minute drive away. She could be there by 9 if she left now. Or she could ignore the message. Pretend it never happened. Chalk it up to stress and grief playing tricks on her mind. But her father's voice echoed in her memory. Destiny girl, when life gives you a mystery, you don't run from it. You solve it. She grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. The park was nearly empty when she arrived, just a few late joggers brave enough to challenge the weather. Destiny parked under a streetlight and sat in her car, engine running, wipers beating a nervous rhythm against the windshield. At exactly 9 o'clock, a figure emerged from the tree line near the old playground. Tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket with the hood pulled up. The person moved with familiar confidence, hands stuffed in pockets, shoulders slightly hunched against the rain. Destiny's heart stopped. Even from 50 yards away, even with his face hidden, she knew that walk. had watched it carry her father to Little League games and school plays and Sunday dinners for 32 years. Thomas Carter stepped into the streetlight, pulled back his hood, and looked directly at her car. He was alive. Destiny sat frozen in her car, engine idling, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the rain. Her father stood 20 feet away under the streetlight like something out of a dream or a nightmare. His face looked older, thinner, with new lines around his eyes and gray in his beard that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But it was him. Undeniably, impossibly him. Thomas raised his hand in a hesitant wave, the same gesture he'd used when picking her up from school as a child. Destiny's chest tightened with a mixture of relief, rage, and complete confusion. She turned off the engine and stepped into the rain. "Dad." The word came out as barely a whisper. "Hey, baby girl." His voice was exactly the same, deep, warm, tinged with the slight southern accent he'd never lost despite 40 years in the North. They stood there in the downpour, staring at each other across an ocean of unspoken questions. Destiny felt like she was drowning in everything she wanted to say, scream, and demand all at once. "You're dead," she said finally. "I went to your funeral today. I saw your casket." Thomas took a step closer, his hands still buried in his jacket pockets. "I know how this looks, Destiny. I know how impossible it seems." "Impossible?" The word exploded out of her like a bullet. "You let me think you were dead. You let me sit in that funeral home and listen to people talk about your memory while you were alive somewhere, doing what exactly?" "Protecting you." "Protecting me from what?" Thomas glanced around the empty park, his cop instincts still sharp even after years away from the force. "Not here. Not like this. Get in your car and follow me. There's a diner on Route 9 that stays open all night. We can talk there." "No." Destiny planted her feet firmly on the wet asphalt. "You don't get to give me orders anymore. You lost that right when you decided to fake your own death and let your family grieve for nothing." The pain that crossed Thomas's face was so raw, so real, that it stopped Destiny's angry words in her throat. "You think this was easy for me?" he asked quietly. "You think I wanted to watch from a distance as they lowered an empty coffin into the ground? You think I wanted to hear your mother cry herself to sleep every night for 2 months? Then why did you do it?" Thomas was quiet for so long that Destiny wondered if he'd answer at all. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with years of carried secrets. "Because some truths are more dangerous than lies, baby girl. And because I'd rather have you hate me and be alive than love me and be dead." The words hit Destiny like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her mind racing through possibilities she didn't want to consider. "What did you do, Dad?" "I did my job. And my job made enemies of some very dangerous people who don't forget and don't forgive." He looked at her with eyes full of regret and love. "Please, Destiny. Just follow me to the diner. Let me explain everything." Against every instinct screaming at her to demand answers right here, right now, Destiny nodded. Maybe it was the exhaustion of the day catching up with her. Maybe it was the desperation in her father's voice. Or maybe it was simply that after 5 years of silence, she wasn't ready to lose him again so quickly. The diner was one of those old-school places with red vinyl booths and pie cases that had seen better decades. At nearly 10 o'clock on a rainy Tuesday night, they were the only customers except for a truck driver hunched over coffee at the counter. Thomas chose a booth in the back corner, positioning himself so he could see both the entrance and the rear exit. Old habits, Destiny realized. Police habits that apparently never died even when you were supposed to. A tired waitress brought them coffee without being asked. Thomas wrapped his hands around the mug like he was trying to absorb its warmth. "Start at the beginning," Destiny said. "And don't you dare lie to me." Thomas nodded. 3 years ago I was working a case. Gang-related drug trafficking, but bigger than anything we'd seen before. Not street corner dealing, this was organized, connected, with ties to people in very high places. What kind of people? The kind that own judges and police commissioners. The kind that make problems disappear. He took a sip of coffee, his hands surprisingly steady. "I got too close. Started connecting dots that certain people didn't want connected." Destiny felt her heart rate increasing. "So you went into witness protection?" "Not officially. The department couldn't protect me through normal channels. Too many people involved, too much corruption. So Detective Sandra Brooks, my partner, she helped me disappear the only way that would work. By faking your death. By staging an accident that would be believable enough to get the heat off and keep you and your mother safe." The coffee in Destiny's mouth suddenly tasted like ash. "Safe from what?" Thomas met her eyes across the table. "They threatened you, baby girl. They knew exactly where you worked, what route you took to your apartment, what coffee shop you stopped at every morning. They knew your mother's schedule, your grandmother's address. They sent me photos. The diner seemed to spin around Destiny. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white with strain. You're saying that people wanted to hurt us because of your case? I'm saying they would have hurt you to get to me. And I couldn't let that happen. So you let us think you were dead instead. It was the only way to keep you safe while I worked with the FBI to build a case strong enough to put these people away for good. Destiny stared at her father, trying to process everything he'd just told her. And now the case is solid. The key players are in custody as of yesterday morning. The threat is over. Thomas reached across the table, his fingers barely touching hers. Now I can come home. Home? Destiny pulled her hand away. You think you can just waltz back into our lives like nothing happened? You think you can put us through that kind of hell and then just say, surprise, I'm alive, and everything goes back to normal? I know I can't undo the pain I caused. I know I might have lost you forever. His voice cracked slightly. But I had to try. I had to hope that someday you'd understand why I made the choices I made. Destiny stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the linoleum floor. I need time to think. This is too much. Destiny, wait. No. She turned back to face him. You've had 3 years to figure out what you wanted to say to me. I deserve at least one night to figure out what I want to say back. Thomas nodded slowly. You're right. But baby girl, I want you to know that not a single day went by that I didn't think about you. That I didn't regret every moment of pain I caused. Destiny looked at this man who was her father but also somehow a stranger. I'll call you tomorrow. You still have my number. Apparently I never lost it. As she walked toward the diner's exit, Thomas called after her. Destiny? She paused but didn't turn around. I love you. That never changed, not even for a second. Destiny pushed through the door into the rain without responding, but her cheeks were wet with more than just the weather. Destiny drove through the rain-slicked streets in a daze, her conversation with Thomas playing on repeat in her mind. Gang connections. Death threats. FBI cases. It sounded like something out of a movie, not her real life. Her phone rang as she pulled into her apartment complex. Grace's name lit up the screen. Mom? Destiny, honey, where are you? You disappeared from the funeral and Ruby said you looked upset. I've been worried sick. Destiny closed her eyes, trying to figure out how to handle this conversation. Her mother's voice sounded raw from crying, fragile in a way that made Destiny want to protect her from any more pain. I'm home now, Mom. I needed some air. Today was hard. I know, baby. I know. It's hard for me too. Grace's voice broke slightly. I keep expecting him to walk through the door, you know? Keep thinking I hear his key in the lock. The irony of those words made Destiny's stomach clench. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Dad's accident, did you see the body? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Grace spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. Why would you ask me something like that? I don't know. Maybe I need closure or something. It's just hard to believe he's really gone. The casket was closed, honey. You know that. The accident it was bad. But yes, I identified him at the hospital. Your father is gone, Destiny. As much as it hurts, we have to accept that and find a way to move forward. Something in her mother's tone set off alarm bells in Destiny's mind. Grace Carter had many qualities, but she was a terrible liar. She always spoke too fast when she was being deceptive, her voice rising slightly in pitch. Mom, are you okay? You sound strange. I'm fine. Just tired. It's been a long day. Grace cleared her throat. Ruby wants to know if you'll come for dinner tomorrow night. She's making your father's favorite pot roast. Sure, Mom. I'll be there. Good. We need to stick together now, the three of us. We're all the family we have left. After hanging up, Destiny sat in her car for another 20 minutes, staring up at her apartment building through the rain-streaked windshield. Her mother was hiding something. The conversation had been full of careful phrases and awkward pauses. Had Grace known? Had she been part of this deception? The thought made Destiny feel sick. If her mother had known Thomas was alive while they planned his funeral, while they grieved together, while Destiny had carried 5 years of guilt about their last argument. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to her father's number. Her thumb hovered over the call button for several minutes before she finally pressed it. Thomas answered on the first ring. Destiny? I just talked to Mom. How is she? You tell me. Did she know? Another long pause. Destiny was getting tired of these hesitations, these careful considerations of how much truth to share. Did she know you were alive, Dad? Yes. The single word hit Destiny like a sledgehammer. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against the steering wheel. How long? From the beginning. She had to know. She had to help sell the story to keep you safe. So everyone was lying to me. Everyone. Destiny listened to me? No. The word exploded out of her. I can't listen to any more of this tonight. I can't process any more betrayal. We were protecting you. You were destroying me. Destiny was shouting now, her voice echoing in the small car. Do you have any idea what the last 3 years have been like? Do you know what it did to me to think you died believing I hated you? I never believed that. How could you not? The last thing I said to you was that you were a failure. The last thing I did was walk out of your life. And then you were gone and I thought I'd never get the chance to take it back. Thomas's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke. Baby girl, you were angry about the divorce. You were 27 years old and your whole world was changing. I never, not for 1 second, thought you hated me. But I did hate you, Destiny whispered. For leaving Mom. For breaking up our family. For choosing your job over us. I know. And I understood why. And now I find out that even when I hated you, you were trying to protect me. That you were willing to let me think you were dead rather than risk someone hurting me. Tears were streaming down her face now. How am I supposed to handle that? How am I supposed to reconcile all of this? I don't know, baby girl. I wish I had better answers for you. Destiny wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I have to go. Will you still come to dinner at Ruby's tomorrow? I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Destiny, wait. One more thing. What? Your grandmother doesn't know. We kept her out of it to protect her too. Tomorrow night might be complicated. Destiny hung up without responding and finally went upstairs to her apartment. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on her couch, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of a world that had been completely upended in the span of a few hours. Her father was alive. Her mother was a liar. Her whole family had been living a deception for 3 years. And tomorrow night, she'd have to sit across from Ruby's dining room table and pretend that everything was normal while her grandmother grieved for a man who was probably sitting in some safe house 20 miles away. Destiny finished her wine and poured another glass. Then another. She needed something to quiet the voices in her head, the questions that multiplied every time she tried to find answers. By the time she finally fell asleep on the couch, still wearing her funeral dress, one thought kept circling through her mind. If her family could lie to her about something this big, what else didn't she know? What other secrets were hiding in the shadows of the Carter family? Ruby Jenkins had been cooking for 76 years, and she could tell when something was wrong with her family the same way she could tell when her cornbread needed another minute in the oven. It was instinct, honed by decades of loving the same people through their best and worst moments. Destiny arrived at Ruby's house 20 minutes late, her eyes red-rimmed and her usual smile nowhere to be found. Grace had been fidgeting all afternoon, jumping every time the phone rang, checking the windows like she expected someone to be watching the house. You two are acting stranger than cats in a rainstorm, Ruby announced as she placed the pot roast on the dining room table. Now sit down and tell me what's got you both so twisted up. Destiny and Grace exchanged a look across the table that spoke volumes. Ruby had raised 4 children and helped raise a dozen grandchildren. She knew a family secret when she saw one. We're just grieving, Grandmama, Destiny said, reaching for the potatoes. People process loss differently. Don't you grandmama me in that tone, Ruby shot back. I've been grieving too, child, but I haven't been jumping at shadows and looking like I haven't slept in days. Grace cleared her throat nervously. Ruby, we're all just trying to adjust to life without Thomas. It's going to take time. Ruby studied her daughter-in-law's face with the intensity of a detective. Grace had been part of the family for 40 years, and Ruby had never seen her this agitated. Not even during the worst parts of the divorce proceedings. Grace, honey, you've been married to my son since you were 19 years old. I've seen you handle job losses, fertility problems, financial troubles, and raising a stubborn daughter. Ruby's voice was gentle but firm. Whatever's got you this rattled, it's bigger than grief. Destiny's fork clattered against her plate. Can we just eat, please? I really don't want to talk about Dad tonight. But Ruby wasn't backing down. 7 decades on this earth had taught her that problems festered in silence and healed in truth. Your daddy loved this pot roast, she said conversationally, spooning gravy over her meat. Remember how he used to sneak into the kitchen before dinner to steal pieces off the cutting board? Ruby, Grace warned. And those Sunday afternoons when he'd fall asleep on my couch watching football, snoring so loud he'd wake himself up. Ruby chuckled at the memory. Man never could figure out why he was tired after eating 2 helpings of everything. Destiny was staring at her plate, her jaw clenched tight. He had the biggest hands of any man I ever knew, Ruby continued. But he could braid your hair so gentle when you were little, Destiny. Remember that? You'd sit between his knees on the floor and he'd work those tiny braids while you watched cartoons. Stop, Destiny whispered. And that laugh of his. Lord, that man could laugh at anything. Even when times were hard, even when the job was getting to him, he could always find something to laugh about. Please stop, Grandmama. He had this way of humming while he washed dishes. Off-key but happy. Your mama used to complain about it, but she'd be smiling while she complained. I said stop. Destiny shot to her feet, her chair toppling backward. He's dead, okay? He's dead and gone, and he's never coming back to steal your pot roast or fall asleep on your couch or braid anyone's hair ever again. Ruby set down her fork and looked at her granddaughter with calm, knowing eyes. Is he, baby girl? The question hung in the air like smoke. Grace went pale, her hands trembling as she reached for her water glass. Destiny froze, her mouth slightly open, caught between a lie and a truth she wasn't ready to tell. What did you say? Grace asked weakly. Ruby pushed back from the table and walked to the kitchen window. She stood there for a moment, looking out at the backyard where Thomas had helped her plant tomatoes every spring for 20 years. I've been alive for 76 years, she said without turning around. I've buried 2 husbands, 3 siblings, my parents, and more friends than I care to count. I know what grief looks like, and I know what secrets look like too. She turned back to face her family. That wasn't grief at the funeral yesterday, Grace. That was guilt. And Destiny, honey, that's not the face of someone mourning their father. That's the face of someone who's been carrying a lie too heavy for their shoulders. Grace burst into tears. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Ruby crossed to her daughter-in-law and wrapped her in a fierce hug. How long have you known? Grace asked through her tears. Known what specifically? That he's alive. Ruby pulled back and looked Grace in the eye. I didn't know for sure until just now, but I suspected. A mother knows her child, living or dead. And I never felt him leave this world. Destiny sank back into her chair, emotionally exhausted. You suspected? Child, your father was a police officer for 25 years. He knew how to disappear when he needed to. And that accident report never sat right with me. Too convenient, too clean. Ruby returned to her seat. Plus, Grace has been getting mail from a P.O. box in Riverside for months. Bills, she said, but I never saw any bills. Grace looked stunned. You knew about the P.O. box? Honey, you're not as sneaky as you think you are. Now, somebody better start talking because I'm too old for games and too smart for lies. So they told her everything. Thomas's case, the threats, the staged accident, the 3 years of hiding. Ruby listened without interrupting, her face cycling through shock, understanding, and finally, a deep sadness. That boy, she said when they finished. That stubborn, protective, sacrificial boy. Just like his father. You're not angry? Destiny asked. Oh, I'm furious, Ruby said matter-of-factly. But not at the reasons why. I understand why he did it. I even understand why you two kept the secret. But I'm mad as hell that my son thought he had to carry this burden alone. He wasn't alone, Grace protested. He had FBI protection and... He was alone in here, Ruby tapped her chest over her heart. Alone with the guilt and the pain of hurting the people he loves most. That's the heaviest kind of alone there is. Destiny felt fresh tears starting. What do we do now, Grandmama? How do we fix this? Ruby reached across the table and took both her granddaughter's hands in her weathered ones. We start by forgiving ourselves for the choices we made out of love and fear. Then we figure out how to be a family again. Do you think he'll come home? Grace asked quietly. Ruby smiled, the first genuine smile any of them had shared in 3 years. Baby, that boy has been trying to come home since the day he left. The question is, are we ready to let him? Thomas sat in his motel room staring at his phone, willing it to ring. Destiny had said she would call, but that was 18 hours ago, and the silence was killing him. He tried watching television, reading, even attempting to sleep, but nothing could quiet the fear that he'd lost his daughter forever. The room was sparse and depressing. 2 beds, a small table, a bathroom that had seen better decades. It was temporary housing provided by the FBI until he could figure out what came next. For 3 years he dreamed of going home. Now he wasn't sure he still had one. A soft knock at the door made him jump. Thomas approached carefully, old instincts still sharp, and peered through the peephole. Destiny stood in the hallway looking nervous and determined. Thomas opened the door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Hey, baby girl. Can I come in?" "Of course." Destiny stepped into the room and looked around, taking in the generic furniture and impersonal atmosphere. "This is where you've been living?" "Just for the past month. Before that, it was a safe house in Pennsylvania. Before that, a small apartment in Ohio." Thomas closed the door and leaned against it. It was never home. They stood there awkwardly for a moment, two people who had once been inseparable but were now virtual strangers. "I told Grandmama," Destiny said finally. Thomas's face went pale. "How did she take it?" "Better than I did. Turns out she's been suspicious for months." Destiny moved to the window and looked out at the parking lot. "She wants to see you. And you?" Destiny turned back to face him. "I don't know what I want. I'm angry and relieved and confused all at the same time. I feel like I don't know who I am anymore." Thomas took a hesitant step toward his daughter. "You're the same person you've always been. Strong, smart, kind, stubborn as a mule when you think you're right." "Am I?" "Because the person I thought I was wouldn't have let pride keep her from talking to her father for 5 years. The person I thought I was would have been mature enough to handle her parents' divorce without throwing a tantrum. Destiny, you were 27. Your whole world was changing. You had every right to be angry." "Did I? Or was I just being selfish?" She started pacing, her nervous energy filling the small room. "You and Mom stayed married for years after you should have gotten divorced because of me, didn't you? Because you didn't want to disrupt my childhood." Thomas didn't answer, but his expression was confirmation enough. "And then when you finally did split up, I punished you for it. I made your life hell during a time when you were probably already struggling." Destiny stopped pacing and looked at her father with tears in her eyes. "I was horrible to you, Dad. And you still loved me enough to fake your own death to protect me. Baby girl, listen to me." Thomas crossed the room and gently took her hands. "You were never horrible. You were hurt and disappointed and trying to process changes you didn't understand. Every parent goes through difficult times with their children. That's part of loving someone unconditionally. But I said such awful things to you. And I said awful things back sometimes. We're human, Destiny. We make mistakes, we hurt each other, we figure out how to forgive and move forward. That's what families do." Destiny pulled her hands free and wiped her eyes. "Mom wants you to come to Sunday dinner this weekend. What do you want?" "I want my dad back," she whispered. "I want the chance to apologize for all the time we lost. I want to tell you about my job and my life and ask your advice about things I've been figuring out alone for 3 years." Thomas felt his own eyes filling with tears. "I want that too. But I also need time to adjust to all of this. To wrap my head around everything I thought I knew being different." "How much time?" "I don't know. Maybe we could start small? Coffee or lunch or something normal in public where I won't fall apart if it gets too overwhelming." Thomas nodded eagerly. "Whatever you need. Whatever feels comfortable for you." "There's something else," Destiny said. "The case you were working on, is it really over? Are we really safe?" "The FBI arrested the last of the key players yesterday morning. The trial will be a media circus, but the immediate threat is gone. Detective Brooks confirmed it herself." "Will you have to testify?" "Yes. But it'll be in federal court with full protection. And afterward, I can go back to being Thomas Carter instead of living under an assumed name." Destiny looked around the motel room again. "You can't stay here much longer. It's depressing. I'm looking at apartments. Somewhere close enough to be part of your lives but far enough away that I'm not overwhelming anyone." Grace appeared in the hallway behind Destiny, and Thomas's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders relaxed, his smile became genuine, and 40 years of shared history passed between them in a single look. "Hello, Grace." "Hello, Thomas." They stared at each other for a long moment, two people who had loved each other, lost each other, and found themselves in an impossible situation that nobody could have prepared for. Ruby broke the tension by pushing past both women and wrapping Thomas in a hug that could have cracked ribs. "Thomas Eugene Carter, if you ever put this family through something like this again, I will personally hunt you down and give you something to really hide from." Thomas laughed, the first genuine laugh any of them had heard from him in years, and hugged his mother-in-law back with equal fierceness. "I missed you too, Ruby." "Missed me? Boy, you've been 20 minutes away this whole time. You could have called." "I couldn't risk it. Any contact could have." "I know why you did it," Ruby interrupted. "That doesn't mean I have to like it." Dinner was awkward at first. Too many careful conversations, too much trying to act normal in a situation that was anything but normal. Thomas asked polite questions about Destiny's job. Grace updated him on neighborhood gossip. Ruby told stories about church activities. But gradually, as the evening progressed, glimpses of their old dynamic began to emerge. Thomas teased Destiny about her college boyfriend that everyone had hated. Grace laughed at one of his terrible jokes. Ruby scolded him for not eating enough vegetables, just like she had for 20 years. So what happens now? Grace asked as Ruby served dessert. Thomas set down his fork and looked around the table. I testify in 3 weeks. After that, the FBI says I can resume my normal life. What does that look like? Destiny asked. I don't know yet. I can't go back to police work. Too much exposure, too many people who still remember the case. I'm thinking maybe private security, or teaching criminal justice at the community college. Where will you live? Thomas glanced at Grace. I found a small apartment across town. Close enough to be part of your lives if you want me to be, far enough away to give everyone space to adjust. That's not necessary, Grace said quietly. Everyone looked at her in surprise. I mean, you don't have to stay away for my sake, she clarified. We were divorced before everything happened. That part of our relationship was already over. But that doesn't mean we can't be friends or co-parents, or whatever the situation requires. Ruby smiled proudly at her daughter-in-law. That's very mature of you, Grace. I've had 3 years to think about it. 3 years to realize that the reasons our marriage ended had nothing to do with Thomas being a bad man or a bad father. We just grew in different directions. Thomas reached across the table and briefly touched Grace's hand. Thank you. For everything. For keeping the secret, for protecting Destiny, for being stronger than I ever gave you credit for. You did what you thought was right, Grace replied. We all did. Destiny watched this exchange with a mixture of sadness and hope. Her parents would never be married again, but maybe they could find a way to be family in a different configuration. Maybe broken things could be rebuilt into something new and better. There's something else we need to talk about, Thomas said. The media attention around the trial is going to be intense. My case broke open one of the largest corruption rings in the state's history. There will be reporters, cameras, people digging into our family's business. How bad? Destiny asked. Bad enough that you might want to take some vacation time from work? Bad enough that I'm worried about all of you being harassed. Ruby straightened her spine. Let them come. I've been dealing with nosy people and difficult situations for 76 years. A few reporters don't scare me. What about you, Grace? Thomas asked. Grace considered the question seriously. I think I've gotten pretty good at keeping secrets. I can probably handle a few questions from strangers. Destiny? I work in marketing, Dad. I deal with pushy people and public relations crises for a living. She gave him a small smile. Besides, I'm proud of what you did. If people want to know about it, I'm not afraid to tell them. Thomas felt something loosen in his chest, a knot of worry he'd been carrying for 3 years. His family was going to be okay. Different than before, complicated in new ways, but okay. There's one more thing, Ruby announced, standing to clear the dessert plates. Thomas, you're coming to church with us next Sunday. Ruby, I don't want to hear it. This family has been through hell and we've come out the other side intact. That deserves some gratitude and some public acknowledgement that we're still standing. Thomas looked around the table at the 3 women who meant everything to him. Yes, ma'am. As they said their goodbyes that evening, Destiny hugged her father for the first time in 5 years. I'm still figuring this out, Dad, she whispered against his shoulder. Me too, baby girl. We'll figure it out together. 3 weeks later, the Carter family found themselves living in the center of a media storm that made Destiny's worst nightmare seem tame by comparison. FBI's star witness returns from the dead, read the headline on the front page of the morning paper. Below it, a photo of Thomas walking into the federal courthouse, his face grim with determination. Destiny sat in her office trying to focus on a client presentation while her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, distant relatives, and co-workers who had just discovered her father was alive. She'd stopped answering after the 15th call. Her assistant knocked on her door. Destiny? There are 2 reporters in the lobby asking to speak with you. Tell them I'm not available. I did. They said they'll wait. Destiny rubbed her temples. How long have they been there? 2 hours. Call security. Have them escorted out and put my name on the no-visitor list for the rest of the week. The trial had been going on for 5 days, and each day brought new revelations about the scope of the corruption Thomas had uncovered. Police commissioners taking bribes. Judges fixing sentences. Evidence disappearing from lockup. The kind of systemic rot that shook public confidence in everything they'd been taught to trust. And at the center of it all was her father, the cop who'd refused to look the other way. Destiny's phone rang again. This time it was Grace. "How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm hiding in my office while reporters camp out in my building lobby." "How do you think I'm holding up?" "They were at my house this morning," Grace said, "wanting to know how it felt to bury my husband when he was still alive. Asking if I was part of the deception or if I was a victim too." "What did you tell them?" "That I had no comment and they needed to get off my property." "But Destiny, one of them knew about your father's apartment. They knew what grocery store he shops at, what gym he joined. These people are digging into everything." Destiny felt a chill of fear. "Are you safe? Detective Brooks has been checking on us. She says the immediate physical danger is over, but the media attention could last for months." "How's Dad holding up?" "He's worried about us more than himself. Keeps apologizing for putting us through this." "It's not his fault." "I know that. You know that. But you know your father, he'll carry the guilt anyway." That evening, Destiny drove to Thomas's apartment for the first time since he'd moved in. The complex was swarming with news vans and reporters who shouted questions at her as she hurried to the building entrance. "Miss Carter, how does it feel to have your father back? Did you know he was alive? Are you proud of what he did?" Destiny kept her head down and pushed through the crowd without responding. Thomas opened his apartment door before she could knock, pulling her inside quickly and checking the hallway before closing it behind her. "This is insane, Dad." "I know. I'm sorry. I never anticipated it would be this intense." The apartment was small but comfortable, furnished with basic necessities and a few personal items that made it feel like home. Photos of the family sat on the end table. His police commendation certificates hung on the wall. "How did the testimony go today?" Thomas sank onto his couch, looking exhausted. "Brutal. The defense attorney tried to make me look like a glory-seeking cop who fabricated evidence. Spent 3 hours attacking my credibility, my motives, my character." "Did it work?" "I don't think so. The evidence speaks for itself. Wire recordings, financial records, testimony from other witnesses. But it's still hard to sit there and have someone tear apart everything you've tried to do with your life." Destiny sat beside her father. "You know we're proud of you, right? Whatever the media says, whatever the defense attorneys claim, we know you did the right thing. Even if it cost us 3 years of being a family? Especially because of that. You sacrificed everything to protect people you'll never meet from criminals who would have kept destroying lives. That's not something to apologize for." Thomas leaned back against the couch cushions. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher. Even if he was too stubborn to let me tell him that for 5 years. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the reporters still gathered outside. "How much longer?" Destiny asked. 2 more days of testimony, maybe 3. Then closing arguments and jury deliberation. "And after that?" "After that, we try to figure out what normal looks like for the Carter family." Destiny's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. "What is it?" "Ruby. She says there are reporters at the church asking about you. They want to know if you're going to speak publicly about the case." Thomas ran his hands through his hair. "Maybe I should withdraw from the case. Find a way to testify that doesn't expose all of you to this circus." "Absolutely not." Destiny's voice was firm. "These people hurt innocent families for years. They threatened to kill us. You're the reason they're going to prison instead of continuing to destroy lives. But the cost is worth it. Dad, look at me." She waited until he met her eyes. "When I was little, you used to tell me that doing the right thing was never easy, but it was always worth it. This is you doing the right thing. We can handle a few weeks of reporters and photographers." Thomas smiled at his daughter, pride swelling in his chest. "When did you become the parent in this relationship?" "About the time you decided to fake your own death to protect me," Destiny replied with a small laugh. "We all had to grow up fast." A loud knock interrupted their conversation. Thomas tensed, moving to look through the peephole. "It's Detective Brooks." He opened the door to admit a tall black woman in her 40s, wearing a serious expression and a badge on her belt. "Sandra, this is my daughter Destiny." "Destiny, Detective Brooks." "It's nice to finally meet you," Sandra said, shaking Destiny's hand. "Your father talks about you constantly. Is everything okay?" Thomas asked. Sandra's expression grew even more serious. "We need to talk. All 3 of you actually. Can you get Grace and Ruby over here?" "What's wrong?" "One of the defendants made bail this afternoon. Marcus Webb, the police commissioner who was taking the biggest bribes. His lawyer filed some motion about new evidence. Destiny felt her stomach drop. Is he a threat? We don't think so. He's got electronic monitoring, federal marshals watching him. But I wanted to update you on the situation. Thomas was already reaching for his phone. I'm calling Grace. While Thomas made arrangements for Grace and Ruby to come over, Sandra pulled Destiny aside. How are you handling all this? The media attention? It's overwhelming, but we'll manage. That's not what I meant. Sandra's voice was gentle. I mean, learning that your father has been alive for 3 years. That has to be incredibly difficult. Destiny considered the question. It is. But you know what's harder? Realizing how much pain he's been carrying. How much he sacrificed to keep us safe. I spent 3 years angry at him for dying and leaving us. Now I have to figure out how to forgive myself for wasting that anger on something that wasn't even real. Sandra nodded. Your father is a good man. One of the best cops I ever worked with. But he's also stubborn and protective to a fault. He would have carried this burden alone forever if it meant keeping you safe. I'm starting to understand that. He's going to need your support over the next few weeks. The trial is taking a toll on him, and the media attention is worse than we anticipated. He's got it, Destiny said without hesitation. Whatever he needs, whatever our family needs to get through this, he's got it. Sandra smiled. He's lucky to have you. No, Destiny replied, looking toward the kitchen where her father was speaking quietly to Grace on the phone. We're lucky to have him back. The 8th day of trial began with Thomas back on the witness stand, facing what prosecutors promised would be his final round of questioning. The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal officials, and family members of corruption victims who had waited years for this moment. Destiny sat in the gallery between Grace and Ruby, all 3 women dressed conservatively and wearing expressions of quiet determination. They had become reluctant public figures overnight, symbols of the innocent families affected by corruption and violence. The lead prosecutor, a sharp woman named Carmen Rodriguez, approached the witness stand with a thick folder in her hands. Detective Carter, I want to take you back to the night you made the decision to fake your death. Can you walk the jury through what happened? Thomas looked directly at the jury, his voice steady and clear. I had just received photographs of my family. My daughter leaving her apartment building. My ex-wife at the grocery store. My mother-in-law working in her garden. The message was clear. We know where they are and we can get to them anytime we want. What was your immediate reaction? Terror. Pure terror. These weren't idle threats. I had seen what this organization did to people who crossed them. Witnesses disappeared. Families were found dead in their homes. Children were hurt to send messages to their parents. A murmur went through the courtroom. In the gallery, Grace reached for Destiny's hand. So you made the decision to disappear? Detective Brooks and I discussed our options. Normal witness protection wouldn't work. There were too many compromised people in the system, too many leaks. The only way to guarantee my family's safety was to make the threat believe I was no longer a problem. Meaning? Meaning I had to die. Rodriguez walked closer to the witness stand. Detective Carter, can you tell the jury how it felt to watch your own funeral? The courtroom fell completely silent. Thomas's composure cracked slightly, his voice thickening with emotion. It was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. Watching my daughter cry. Listening to people share memories of me while I stood 50 yards away, hidden behind trees. Seeing my ex-wife throw dirt on an empty coffin. He paused, wiping his eyes. I wanted to run to them. I wanted to tell them I was alive, that I was sorry, that I never wanted to hurt them. Why didn't you? Because loving someone sometimes means letting them think you're gone if that's what keeps them safe. In the gallery, Ruby was openly weeping. Grace had her arm around Destiny, who was struggling to maintain her composure. The defense attorney, an expensive-suited man named Davidson, stood for cross-examination with predatory confidence. Detective Carter, isn't it true that you were facing an internal affairs investigation at the time of your supposed death? No, that's not true. Isn't it true that your marriage was failing and you were behind on child support payments? My marriage had ended, but I was current on all my obligations to my daughter. Isn't it convenient that your death eliminated any financial responsibilities you had? Thomas's jaw clenched. I didn't fake my death to avoid child support, Mr. Davidson. I faked it to avoid my child being murdered. Objection. Sustained. The jury will disregard. Davidson continued his attack for another hour, trying to paint Thomas as a corrupt cop who had staged his death to escape consequences for his own actions. But with each question, Thomas remained calm, factual, and consistent. Finally, Rodriguez stood for redirect examination. Detective Carter, in the 3 years since your supposed death, have you received any compensation for your cooperation with this investigation? No. Have you been promised any book deals, movie rights, or other financial benefits? No. Have you sought publicity or recognition for your actions? Absolutely not. I would have been happy to remain dead to the world if it meant these criminals went to prison. One final question, Detective. Do you regret the choice you made? Thomas looked out at his family in the gallery, his eyes lingering on Destiny's face. I regret the pain I caused my family. I regret the 3 years we lost together. But I don't regret keeping them alive. The prosecution rested their case that afternoon. The defense called a parade of character witnesses for the defendants, trying to paint them as dedicated public servants who had made mistakes rather than criminals who had corrupted an entire system. But the evidence was overwhelming. Wire recordings of bribes being negotiated. Bank records showing unexplained deposits. Testimony from other witnesses who had been threatened or intimidated. On the final day of testimony, Marcus Webb, the former police commissioner, took the stand in his own defense. He was a large man with silver hair and an expensive suit, radiating the kind of authority that had made him untouchable for decades. Commissioner Webb, his attorney began, did you ever take bribes in exchange for favorable treatment? Absolutely not. I dedicated 30 years of my life to law enforcement. I served this community with integrity and honor. What about these recordings the prosecution has played? Taken out of context. Conversations about legitimate police business twisted to sound criminal. And Detective Carter's testimony? Webb's face hardened. Thomas Carter was a disgruntled officer with a grudge against the department. He was facing disciplinary action for excessive force complaints. His so-called investigation was nothing more than a vendetta against officers who had the courage to discipline him. The lies came so easily, so convincingly, that Destiny felt sick listening to them. This was why her father had sacrificed everything, because men like Webb could sit in front of a jury and lie with complete confidence, knowing that their reputation and status would protect them. But Rodriguez was ready for cross-examination. Commissioner Webb, you say Detective Carter was facing disciplinary action. Can you produce any documentation of these excessive force complaints? The records may have been misfiled. Misfiled? Or do they not exist because your testimony is false? Objection. Sustained. Rodriguez produced a thick file. Commissioner Webb, I'm holding Detective Carter's personnel file. 25 years of service. Multiple commendations. No excessive force complaints. No disciplinary actions. Would you like to explain the discrepancy? Webb's confident facade began to crack. I may have confused him with another officer. You may have confused the man whose investigation brought down your criminal organization? The man whose testimony detailed your personal involvement in taking bribes and fixing cases. You never what, Commissioner? You never took this briefcase full of cash from Vincent Morales. Rodriguez played a wire recording. Webb's voice came through the courtroom speakers, clear as a bell, negotiating the price for dismissing drug charges. By the time cross-examination was finished, Webb looked like a broken man, his lies exposed and his credibility destroyed. Closing arguments began the next morning. The prosecution methodically laid out 3 years' worth of evidence, painting a picture of systematic corruption that had infected every level of law enforcement. They called Thomas a hero, a man who had risked everything to expose the truth. The defense argued that their clients were scapegoats, victims of an overzealous federal investigation led by a disgruntled cop with questionable motives. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned with their verdict, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Thomas sat at the prosecutor's table, surrounded by federal agents but somehow looking very alone. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of conspiracy to commit bribery, how do you find the defendant Marcus Webb? Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom like a gunshot. In the gallery, Destiny felt her knees go weak with relief. On the charge of obstruction of justice, how do you find the defendant Marcus Webb? Guilty. One by one the verdicts came down. Guilty on all counts for all defendants. Years of corruption, intimidation, and violence finally met with justice. As the defendants were led away in handcuffs, Thomas turned to look at his family in the gallery. For the first time in 3 years, his face showed not just relief but peace. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the family, But this time their questions felt different. Less invasive, more respectful. "Mr. Carter, how does it feel to see justice served?" Thomas looked at the cameras with dignity and quiet strength. "It feels like 3 years of sacrifice was worth it. No family should have to live in fear because they chose to do the right thing." "What's next for you?" Thomas put his arm around Destiny and smiled at Grace and Ruby. "Now I get to go home." 2 months after the trial, life was beginning to settle into something that resembled normal for the Carter family. The media attention had died down to occasional follow-up stories about sentencing hearings and appeals. Thomas had started teaching criminal justice classes at the community college, finding purpose in sharing his experience with young people considering law enforcement careers. But perhaps the most significant change was happening on a personal level, in the small everyday moments that reminded them all why family mattered. "You're burning the pancakes," Destiny called from the kitchen table, where she was reading the Sunday paper and drinking coffee. "I am not burning the pancakes," Thomas replied from the stove, though a thin line of smoke was beginning to rise from the pan. "I'm creating a golden brown crust that adds flavor and texture." "That's what Dad used to say when he burned the pancakes at our house." Grace laughed from her seat across from Destiny. They were at Ruby's house for their new Sunday tradition. Breakfast instead of dinner, a change Ruby had instituted because she said the family needed more light and joy in their rituals and less formality. "I can cook pancakes just fine, thank you very much," Thomas said, flipping a distinctly darker than golden pancake onto a plate. "Sure you can, honey," Grace replied in the tone of a woman who had watched the same pancake drama for 20 years of marriage. Ruby emerged from her bedroom fully dressed for church, took one look at the smoking pan, and gently nudged Thomas aside. "Move, child. Let someone who knows what she's doing handle this." "I was handling it perfectly well." Ruby scraped the burnt remnants out of the pan and started fresh batter. "You handle criminals and corruption just fine, Thomas Carter. But you never could handle breakfast foods." Destiny watched this playful exchange with a heart full of gratitude. 6 months ago, she had thought her father was dead and her family was broken forever. Now they were arguing about pancakes on a Sunday morning like families do, creating new memories on top of the old ones. "Speaking of church," Grace said, checking her watch, "we should probably finish eating if we're going to make the 11 o'clock service." Thomas had been attending church with them every Sunday since the trial ended, partly because Ruby insisted and partly because he said he had a lot to be thankful for. The congregation had welcomed him back from the dead with remarkable grace, treating his resurrection as something between a miracle and a really good news story. "Are you nervous about today?" Destiny asked her father. Thomas was giving his testimony to the congregation that morning, sharing his story publicly for the first time since the trial. Pastor Williams had asked him to speak about faith in times of crisis, about finding hope in impossible circumstances. "A little," Thomas admitted. "It's one thing to testify in court about facts and evidence. It's another thing to talk about faith and family and what really matters." "Just speak from your heart," Ruby advised, sliding perfectly golden pancakes onto plates. "These people love you. They've been praying for you and this family for 3 years. They want to hear how God brought you through." An hour later, Thomas stood at the pulpit of Mount Olive Baptist Church, looking out at a congregation filled with people who had known him since he was a young man courting Grace 40 years ago. In the front row, his family smiled up at him with encouragement and love. "3 years ago, I made a choice that broke my family's heart," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the sanctuary. "I chose to let them think I was dead rather than risk them being hurt because of my job. It seemed like the only option at the time, but it caused pain that I'll regret for the rest of my life." He talked about the loneliness of hiding, the guilt of watching his family grieve, the fear that he might never be able to come home. But he also talked about faith, the faith that kept him believing his sacrifice would be worth it, the faith that his family would find a way to forgive him, the faith that truth and justice would ultimately prevail. "I learned that sometimes loving someone means making choices they don't understand," Thomas said. "Sometimes it means carrying burdens alone so they don't have to. But I also learned that families are stronger than we think. That love survives even death, even fake death." The congregation chuckled softly at that. "My daughter told me something a few weeks ago that I want to share with you. She said that broken things can be rebuilt into something new and better, something stronger than what came before. That's what we're doing as a family now. We're not trying to go back to who we were 3 years ago. We're building something new on the foundation of everything we've learned about love and sacrifice and forgiveness." When he finished speaking, the congregation gave him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. But Thomas only had eyes for his family in the front row, all of them crying and clapping and looking at him with the kind of love that makes everything worthwhile. After church, they went back to Ruby's house for their traditional Sunday afternoon of too much food and gentle family arguing. Thomas helped Ruby in the kitchen while Grace and Destiny set the table and caught up on the week's events. "I have an announcement," Grace said as they sat down to eat. Everyone looked at her expectantly. "I've been thinking about selling my condo and buying a house. Something with enough space for Sunday dinners and holidays and maybe even room for a certain someone to visit his grandbabies when they come along someday." Destiny nearly choked on her sweet tea. "Grandbabies? Mom, I'm not even dating anyone seriously yet," Grace said with a meaningful look. "But when you do and when you start having babies, I want to be ready to spoil them properly." "What kind of house?" Ruby asked, practically glowing at the mention of future great-grandchildren. "Something with a big kitchen and a dining room table that seats 8 comfortably. Maybe a screened porch for summer evenings. Definitely space for a workshop in the basement for someone who likes to tinker with woodworking projects." Thomas looked up from his plate, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Grace, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate," Grace said quickly. "We're divorced and that's not changing. But we're family, Thomas. We're always going to be family. And families should have space to be together." "Like a mother-in-law suite?" Destiny asked, grinning at her parents' obvious discomfort with the logistics of this arrangement. "More like a family house with separate spaces for privacy," Grace clarified. "Adults who care about each other but don't necessarily want to share a bathroom." Ruby clapped her hands together. "I think it's a wonderful idea. This family has spent too much time separated. It's time to find new ways to be together." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, clearly emotional about the offer. "Are you sure, Grace? I don't want to complicate your life or make things awkward." "Thomas Eugene Carter, we've been through fake death, federal trials, and media circuses together. If we can survive all that, we can certainly figure out how to share a house like civilized adults. Besides," Destiny added, "someone needs to keep you from burning the pancakes." Thomas laughed and wiped his eyes. "When do we start house hunting?" "Next weekend," Grace replied. "Ruby, you're coming with us. Destiny, clear your schedule. This is a family project." And so, 6 months after Thomas Carter rose from the dead, the Carter family began planning their future together. Not as the same people they had been before, but as stronger, wiser, more grateful versions of themselves. That evening, as they sat on Ruby's front porch watching the sunset, Destiny reflected on everything that had brought them to this moment. "Dad." "Yeah, baby girl? I'm glad you came back from the dead." "Me too, sweetheart." "Me too." 1 year later, the Carter family gathered around their new dining room table for Christmas dinner. The house Grace had bought was everything she'd promised. Spacious enough for family gatherings, comfortable enough for quiet evenings, and designed with separate spaces that allowed Thomas his independence while keeping him close to the people he loved. The basement workshop hummed with projects in various stages of completion. Thomas had discovered a passion for building furniture, creating pieces that would last for generations. His latest project was a rocking chair for the grandbaby that might come someday, complete with hand-carved details that told the story of their family's journey. Destiny had been promoted at work, her handling of the media crisis during the trial earning her recognition as someone who could manage complex public relations challenges with grace and integrity. She was dating a colleague named David, a quiet man who made her laugh and treated her family's complicated history as just another interesting chapter in their story rather than drama to be avoided. Grace had thrown herself into making their house a home, creating spaces filled with photographs that chronicled their journey from brokenness to healing. The mantel held pictures from the trial, Thomas's teaching award from the community college, Ruby's 80th birthday party, and dozens of candid moments from their new Sunday traditions. Ruby, now 81 and still sharp as ever, had appointed herself the family historian, recording stories and memories in a leather-bound journal she planned to pass down to future generations. "Someone needs to remember how we got through this," she said. "Someone needs to know that families can survive anything if they love each other enough." "Thomas, will you say grace?" Grace asked as they all joined hands around the table. Thomas looked around at his family, his daughter glowing with happiness and confidence, his ex-wife who had become his dearest friend, his mother-in-law who had never stopped believing in second chances, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the complicated, beautiful life they had built together. "Lord, thank you for second chances. Thank you for families who forgive. Thank you for bringing us through the darkness into this light. Help us to never take for granted the gift of being together, the blessing of another day to love each other well. Amen." "Amen," they chorused and began passing dishes around the table. "I have an announcement," Destiny said as she served herself mashed potatoes. Everyone paused, forks halfway to mouths. David asked me to marry him. The table erupted in excitement. Ruby clapped her hands, Grace started crying happy tears, and Thomas stood up to hug his daughter. When? Grace asked through her tears. We haven't set a date yet. Probably next fall. We want to do it here in the backyard with just family and close friends. I'll start planning immediately, Grace announced, her party organizing instincts kicking into high gear. Actually, Destiny said with a smile, we were hoping you'd help us plan it, Mom. But no stress, no drama, no perfectionist tendencies. Just a simple celebration of two people who love each other, surrounded by the people who love them. Thomas sat back down, his heart full to overflowing. Does he make you happy, baby girl? He makes me laugh every day. He listens when I talk about work. He brings you tools for your workshop projects even though he doesn't know the difference between a screwdriver and a socket wrench. He sits through Ruby's stories about the old days and asks follow-up questions like he's genuinely interested. He sounds perfect, Ruby announced. When do I get to interrogate him properly? He's coming for New Year's dinner, Destiny replied. You can grill him then. Oh, I intend to. As the afternoon progressed, they shared stories and memories, creating new traditions while honoring old ones. Thomas told them about his favorite students at the college, young people who reminded him why he'd become a police officer in the first place. Grace updated them on her volunteer work at the Literacy Center, where she was teaching adults to read and discovering a passion for education she'd never known she had. Ruby regaled them with neighborhood gossip and updates on church activities, still the social center of everyone's universe despite her advancing age. She had started a grief support group at Mount Olive, helping other families navigate loss and recovery with the wisdom she'd gained from their own journey. You know what I've been thinking about lately? Destiny said as they cleared the dinner dishes. What's that? Thomas asked. That message you sent me at your funeral. I'm not dead. I am still alive. I was so angry about the deception, but now I think it was the most honest thing anyone had said to me in years. How so? Because you weren't just talking about being physically alive. You were talking about refusing to give up on our family. About fighting to come back to us no matter how impossible it seemed. About believing that love could survive anything, even death. Thomas stopped washing dishes and looked at his daughter with wonder. I never thought about it that way. I think about it all the time now. Especially when things get difficult or complicated. I ask myself, what part of this situation is dead and what part is still alive? What can I fight for? What's worth saving? Grace smiled at her daughter's wisdom. And what did you learn? That families don't die just because they change shape. That love doesn't disappear just because it gets tested. That sometimes the most broken-looking things are actually the strongest. As the evening wound down and they gathered in the living room for their traditional Christmas movie, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The cost had been high, 3 years of separation, pain that could never be completely erased, scars that would always remind them of what they'd survived. But the rewards had been immeasurable. They knew now that their love for each other was stronger than fear, more powerful than deception, more enduring than death itself. They had learned to forgive not just each other but themselves. They had discovered that families could be rebuilt in new configurations without losing their essential nature. Most importantly, they had learned that second chances were not just gifts to be received, but choices to be made every single day. Dad. Destiny said softly as the movie credits rolled and Ruby dozed in her chair. Yeah, baby girl? Welcome home. Thomas smiled and pulled his daughter close. It's good to be here. Outside, snow began to fall softly on the house where the Carter family had learned that love was stronger than death, that truth was worth any sacrifice, and that the best families were not those that never faced hardship, but those that faced it together and came out stronger on the other side. In the basement workshop, the rocking chair waited patiently for the grandchild who would someday hear this story, the story of how their grandfather came back from the dead, how their grandmother kept the family's secrets and heart intact, how their mother learned to forgive the impossible, and how their great-grandmother's wisdom guided them all through the darkness and into the light. It was a story worth preserving, worth passing down, worth remembering. The story of the Carter family who learned that sometimes the most beautiful beginnings come from what looks like an ending.